Okay, so you know how we just like automatically expect things to work, right? Like
Mhm.
I grab my allergy meds, I take one, I assume the next one is going to be just as effective.
Yeah.
You buy a bottle of ibuprofen and you kind of trust that each pill will be just like the last one.
Right.
You don't really think about the fact that there's this whole world of manufacturing that goes into ensuring that consistency, and it's not just like luck.
Right. It's actually a very systematic and rigorous process.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to delve into today.
Absolutely.
For our deep dive, we're going to unpack this whole world of process validation, which is basically how manufacturers prove that their processes are going to reliably pump out products that meet all those like quality standards.
Exactly. It's all about building in quality from the very beginning.
And, we've got a bunch of sources like we've got some stuff from the FDA, some industry guidelines, some real world
Yeah,
examples.
and even some historical data from past episodes.
Right, exactly. So, our mission today for you, our listener, is to really grasp how these manufacturing processes are like constantly proven to deliver that quality that we like sort of take for granted. We want to go beyond just, the what. We want to understand the how. So, we're not just going to like skim the surface. We're diving deep into the specifics.
It's going beyond just trusting that it works
Mm.
to really understanding why it works.
Exactly. So, first off, let's talk about prospective validation.
Okay.
What exactly is that all about?
So prospective validation is basically taking that um, proactive, forward-thinking approach.
Yeah.
You're trying to establish documented evidence that a system, a manufacturing system, is going to function exactly as it's supposed to. And
Oh,
this is all based on pre-planned testing before you even start regular production.
got it. So you're not like waiting for things to go wrong in the real world. You're trying to catch them beforehand.
Exactly. It's like a really, really thorough test run, kind of like a dress rehearsal, but with a lot more scientific rigor.
Yeah. Okay, so when would they like typically use this prospective validation approach?
So this is typically done when you have a brand new process,
Mm-hmm.
something that's never been done before.
Hmm.
Or if you have an existing process, but you're making some like major changes to it.
Okay,
Maybe you're like changing a key ingredient or, I don't know, upgrading a piece of equipment. You need to make sure that this change isn't going to mess things up.
that makes sense. So it's like proving it's going to work before you go live with it.
Precisely. And a really crucial part of this whole prospective validation process is the validation protocol.
Okay, what exactly is that?
Um, think of the validation protocol as like the instruction manual, the super detailed instruction manual for the whole testing process.
Okay.
It outlines every single step like really meticulously.
So what kind of stuff is in this protocol?
Well, for starters, it's going to define the predefined acceptance criteria.
Like what does that mean?
So these are the specific standards, the benchmarks that the process absolutely has to meet in order to be considered validated.
Okay, so it's like pass or fail, it's going to hit these markers, or it's back to the drawing board.
Exactly. And then the protocol is also going to specify the exact test methods that they're going to use.
Okay, so you can't just like make up some tests on the fly. These have to be legit, right?
Right. They need to be scientifically valid. And there are a few key organizations that provide these scientifically valid methods, especially for pharmaceuticals,
Mm,
like the USP,
the UFP.
the United States Pharmacopoeia. They're like kind of the gold standard. They set those standards for like drug quality,
Mhm.
and they give you scientifically sound ways to actually test and see if a drug meets those standards.
Mm,
You've also got AOAC International, which is more for like food and beverages.
got it.
They give you those validated methods. And then you've got the FCC, the Food Chemicals Codex for certain ingredients.
Okay.
And if you're worried about bacteria, you've got the BAM, the Bacteriological
Right.
Analytical Manual.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And even the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, comes into play if environmental testing is something that's like relevant to the product.
Yeah.
And the EAS Consulting Group video transcript specifically mentions subpart J of 21 CFR 111, which talks about like the importance of these scientifically valid methods,
Mm-hmm.
section 320 and all that.
Okay, so basically you got to make sure you're using the right tools for the job, and the protocol spells all that out.
Exactly.
And then once you have that plan with all the like success criteria and the right tests, what happens next?
Well, then you actually do the test runs.
Right.
And during these runs, you're collecting tons of data, documenting every single thing to see if the process can consistently produce products that meet those quality standards.
So it's like a real world simulation, kind of.
Right. It's like, okay, let's see if this thing actually works the way we think it does. And you're looking for that consistency batch after batch.
And then you put all that data together into a, what, a report?
Exactly. A validation report.
Yeah.
And this report summarizes all the findings from those test runs. And most importantly, it says, did this process pass or fail?
Okay.
Did it meet those predefined criteria that we set out in the protocol? And if it passes, boom.
You're good to go?
You have documented evidence that this new or changed process is actually reliable.
Awesome. So that's prospective validation, right?
Yeah.
Proving it will work before you even really start. But what happens if you've got a process that's already up and running?
Right.
Maybe you don't have all that fancy documentation from the get-go.
Yeah. Well, in that case, you might use concurrent validation.
Concurrent.
And concurrent validation is basically, you're validating while you're producing.
Oh, okay. So it's like real-time validation.
Exactly. It's happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And this might be necessary if, you don't have enough historical data to do a prospective validation.
Got it.
Maybe this process has been running for a while, but no one really documented it properly. So instead of those pre-planned test runs, you're actually using your everyday production batches to gather your validation data.
Okay. So you're essentially killing two birds with one stone.
Exactly. You're making product and validating at the same time.
Smart. But how do you actually make sure it's being done properly if you're, like, in the thick of things?
Well, that's where in-process monitoring and testing come in.
Okay.
And as we talked about in, Season 2, in-process controls are those checks and balances that happen while a product is being made.
Right.
So you're not just waiting for the final product to be done, you're constantly checking along the way.
So it's like built-in quality checks at every stage.
Exactly. And this is crucial for concurrent validation because you're using those real-world batches to prove that your process is reliable.
So are you, like, testing every single batch then?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And because of that, documentation becomes even more critical.
Right.
You need to keep meticulous records of everything that's happening with each batch.
Okay, so lots of paperwork.
Yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming,
Yeah.
but it's necessary because you're building your validation evidence from those actual production runs.
I see. And what happens to all that data, all that documentation from those routine batches?
Well, all that data is then analyzed very, very carefully.
Okay.
You're looking for those trends and patterns to see if the process is consistently meeting those predefined quality attributes.
So it's not just about one good batch. It's got to be consistent across the board.
Exactly. You're looking for that reliability over time, even under normal operating conditions.
It sounds like this concurrent validation approach requires, like, a really tight ship.
Yeah, it definitely does. You need a strong system for process control and monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
You have to trust that your systems are sensitive enough to catch anything that might be going wrong. Got it.
So we've talked about proving a process will work before it starts, perspective,
Yeah.
and proving it works while it's running, concurrent. But what about those processes that have been around forever? Maybe they were set up before all these fancy validation methods were even a thing.
Yeah, well, that's where retrospective validation comes in.
Retrospective.
And retrospective validation is all about looking back at historical data.
Okay, so you're digging into the archives.
Exactly. You're looking at all those old production records, testing results, everything you can find to see if the process has been reliable over time.
Oh, interesting.
It's like building a case for the reliability of a process based on its track record.
So what kind of historical records are we talking about here?
Well, batch records are really important.
Okay.
The EAS Consulting Group video transcript and our own Season 2 transcript both mentioned how crucial those are. They tell you exactly what happened during each production run.
Mm-hmm.
You're also looking at testing results, both from the finished product and any in-process tests that they did.
Okay.
Stability data is important, too, to see how the product's quality holds up over time, which we also discussed in Season 2.
And I'm guessing it's not just about finding the good stuff. You also have to look for, like, the times when things went wrong, right?
Oh, absolutely. You're looking for those complaint records, which ICH Q914 mentions, to see if customers have reported any recurring issues.
Right.
And you're also looking for deviation reports, which ICH Q914 and the Miltenyi Biotech video transcript both talked about.
Okay.
These tell you about any unplanned events that happened during production and how they handled those situations.
So it's like a full investigation into the history of the process.
Exactly. You want to get the complete picture.
And then you do, like, a trend analysis of all that data.
Right, which both the Season 2 and EAS Consulting Group transcripts mentioned along with Subpart J, Section 315 of 21 CFR 111 from that EAS transcript, which emphasizes the importance of this historical quality review.
So for those who might not be familiar, ICH is the International Council for Harmonization.
Right, they developed those guidelines for pharmaceutical quality.
Got it.
And with trend analysis, you're looking for consistency. You want to see that the process has been performing within those acceptable limits over a long period.
So it's not just about, like, a few good years. It's got to be a proven track record.
Exactly.
But what if the data is, like, all over the place?
Right.
Or what if there haven't been many changes to the process, so you don't have many data points to compare?
Well, that's a really good point. Retrospective validation isn't always appropriate.
Okay.
If the data is messy or if there's not enough of it, you can't really rely on this method.
Got it. So it's not a magic bullet.
No, it's
Oh,
not.
yeah.
You got to have that solid foundation of data to make it work.
Okay, so we've talked about the three main validation methods: prospective, concurrent, and retrospective. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the documentation.
Okay.
We've mentioned validation protocols, and the EAS consulting group video transcript really stressed the importance of written procedures.
Yeah, they're absolutely crucial.
So let's break it down. What exactly goes into a validation protocol?
Well, first and foremost, you need to define the objectives.
Okay, so, like, what are you trying to prove?
Exactly. What's the goal of this whole validation study? Then you need to describe the process itself in detail.
Okay.
What are the steps involved? What equipment and materials are you using? And that should also include equipment qualification, DQ, IQ, OQ, and PQ.
Right, which we talked about earlier, and which is also referenced in Syed Imtiaz Haider's book, as well as the EAS Consulting Group and Season 2 transcripts.
Right. For those who might not remember, that's design qualification, installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification.
Yep. So you got to make sure the equipment itself is up to snuff.
Exactly. And then the protocol also needs to specify the test parameters.
Okay, so, like, what exactly are you measuring?
Right. And more importantly, what are those acceptance criteria? What are the limits? And then going back to those scientifically valid test methods, you need to describe exactly how you're going to measure those parameters.
Okay.
And then there's the sampling plan.
Okay, so how many samples are you taking and from where?
Right. And how often are you taking them? And this might involve referencing those established procedures like 21 CFR 211.84, which talks about sampling and testing for drug products.
So lots of details to iron out.
Yeah, the protocol is all about being specific.
Yeah. So you've got your objectives, your process description, your equipment specs, your tests, your sampling plan. What else goes in this protocol?
Well, you also need to describe the statistical methods you'll be using to analyze the data.
Okay.
So things like statistical quality control criteria, which 21 CFR 211.165 mentions. You also need to define roles and responsibilities.
So who's doing what?
Exactly. And then finally, you outline the format for the validation report.
So the protocol is like the blueprint and the report's the, like, final product.
Right.
So what goes into that validation report?
Well, first, you've got a summary of the whole study. Then you present the detailed results of all the tests that you ran.
Yeah.
And if there were any deviations from the protocol, you have to document those and explain what happened.
Okay, so, like, if something went wrong or didn't go as planned.
Exactly. And then you analyze all the data, comparing it to those acceptance criteria that we talked about.
Okay.
And then comes the big conclusion. Did the process pass or fail?
Yeah.
Is it validated? And then you might also include some recommendations for ongoing monitoring.
Got it. So the protocol sets the stage, the tests are performed, and the report delivers the verdict.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked a lot about, like, procedures and consistency, but what about anticipating potential problems?
Right.
That's where risk assessment comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The Season 7 handbook and all those season materials on quality risk management really hammered that home.
Right. So how does risk assessment fit into this whole validation puzzle?
Well, as the Season 7 handbook puts it, risk assessment is all about asking that question, what could possibly go wrong? You're identifying those potential failure points in the process. And then, once you know what could go wrong, you can figure out how critical each step is.
Okay, so not all steps are created equal in terms of risk.
Exactly. And by focusing on those high-risk areas, you can really streamline your validation efforts.
Right, because you're putting your resources where they matter most. The Season 2 transcript also touched on that with those risk-based approaches to equipment management.
Exactly. And risk assessment also helps you determine those acceptance criteria.
Okay.
If a step is high risk, you might need to set tighter limits on what's considered acceptable.
Got it.
And it also lets you figure out how much sampling and testing you need to do.
Okay.
High-risk areas might need more frequent checks or more thorough testing.
So are there like specific tools or methods that they use for risk assessment?
Yeah, there are a bunch of different tools and techniques, but one concept that's often used is like hazard analysis and critical control points, or HACCP.
HACCP, okay.
Yeah, the PECB video transcript mentioned that,
Mm.
mainly for food safety, but the principles are pretty similar.
Okay.
It's about systematically identifying those potential hazards in the process and then putting controls in place to minimize those risks.
So it's about being proactive, not just reactive.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've done your risk assessment, you've validated your process. Are you done?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
Validation isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
You got to keep an eye on things.
So there's ongoing monitoring.
Absolutely. Continuous monitoring is essential to make sure that process stays validated over time.
Okay, so what are they monitoring?
They're monitoring those key process parameters.
Like what?
Things like temperature, pressure, mixing times, flow rates, pH levels.
Okay, so anything that could affect the quality of the final product.
Exactly. And like 21 CFR 110.80 or B2 specifically talks about controlling those factors in food manufacturing.
So if they see something out of whack, that's a red flag, right?
Yeah, definitely. That could mean you need to revalidate the process.
Revalidate, okay.
And there are other things that can trigger revalidation too.
Like what?
Like if you change your raw materials or components, as 21 CFR 211.84 outlines, you might need to revalidate.
Okay.
Or if you make major changes to your equipment,
Mm-hmm.
like if you do a big repair or even just move a piece of equipment, the EAS Consulting Group video transcript mentioned that.
Right, because even a small change in the environment could throw things off.
Exactly. Or if you change the manufacturing process itself,
Okay.
or if you make changes to the facility or the surrounding environment.
So basically anything that could affect the process.
Right. And technological upgrades too.
Okay.
Like if you implement a new software system, that ties back to 21 CFR Part 11 on electronic records and signatures, which the EAS transcript talked about.
And what about, like, if they see something weird in the data?
Right.
Like an unexpected trend?
Absolutely. The Season 2 transcript mentioned that, specifically with data analysis under subpart of relevant regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Those unexpected trends or deviations can also be a sign that you need to revalidate. And there's a whole system for managing these changes called engineering change control, which Syed Mintiaz Haider's book discusses.
So basically revalidation is like a checkup to make sure everything's still working as it should.
Exactly. It's about maintaining that validated state even as things change around you.
Okay, so that was a lot of information.
Yeah.
But I think we covered a lot of ground. We talked about the 3 main validation methods, the documentation involved, the role of risk assessment, and the importance of ongoing monitoring and revalidation. It really makes you appreciate all the work that goes into making sure the things we use every day are safe and effective.
It really does. It's a whole system designed to build quality into every step of the process.
Exactly. So thinking about all this, what do you think are the biggest challenges for manufacturers trying to maintain these validated processes, especially with all the crazy technological advancements happening these days? It seems like it'd be a constant battle to stay ahead of the curve.
It definitely is. I mean, technology is evolving so quickly,
Yeah,
and that can make it tough to keep your processes up to date.
right.
And then you've got all the regulatory requirements, which can be complex and constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you have to balance all of that with the need to be efficient and cost-effective.
Right.
So it's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a lot to juggle. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of process validation.
It was a pleasure.
And for you, our listener, if you're interested in learning more about specific validation methods or the regulatory landscape, be sure to check out the resources mentioned in this episode.
And as always, feel free to reach out with any questions or comments.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.